So by now, at this point, we're not um, sacrificing other people by alluding to this transitional state of operation where one becomes an operator. In fact, we've come to the state, the edge of the universe, so to speak, where we look at this sort of um, like this tesseract, right? We look at the transitioning, shaping, morphing form of the sun, right? And we realize that what is being praised in Mecca, what is being praised in all religions and all heresy type deviation, divinations that branch off of this, that are forks off of it, i.e., Satanism and Dionysian worship and so forth, that at even with the Masonic order at the root, and especially the Masonic order, the Eastern Stars, the Mormons, what have you, that these are all just derivatives of placements that give importance to um, a unit of time. So if you were to draw something that is linear, do you understand how profound that is? That you are making a statement of a size model. You are saying that because of the size of this, there is no arch or arc, right? And therefore, it is a particular unit in time. In other words, to draw a linear line, as you know, in physics, in time space, you would come up with something that arced or arched, right? When you were traveling a specific distance, any distance beyond sort of a Planck wall scale, right? So we're talking about the initial unit of time when we even suggest a linear line. So let that wrap around your head a few times, right? And then you get to the praise and the worship of a form, right? That you are praising a moment in space time where the materium, as Cliff High likes to call it, right? So you get into the forms of matter and material, right? Where you are now more than suggesting, you are ardently worshiping because you're afraid, because you have this existence, this phenomenon of self, right? And you think that you observing noumenon, right? That phenomenon that exists in someone else that you are just observing, or something else, right? That is held to a form, and that you want to release yourself from the fact that you are worshiping a form, but you're locked into or away from a form that is keeping you from prosperity. So this gets into things that are very scary, because when Cliff High is talking about the demiurge, which I'd looked at and studied years ago, and then you look at Jason Reza Giorgiani and you're like, why is this guy sort of rehashing Zoroastrianism or Zarathustraism, if you want to call it that, right? If you're really looking at it from a Nietzschean type perspective. But it goes further than that, right? So, and then this Promethean figure that he's positing from his large amassing of education and seeing these mathematicians like Copernicus or Euclid and so forth, Gauss, right? He's seeing that these people are arriving at a certain point, right? And that if you begin to get into astrology, if you begin to get into the zodiacal watching of the stars, and you try to separate alchemy from chemistry, if you try to separate astrology from astronomy, you're going to be hard pressed to go any further, because to arrive at certain truths, you had to interact with the aether itself. You're an entered apprentice. You're an initiate, and you may even be entering like Manly P. Hall, where he's talking about the U.S. and the future of the U.S. And to me, it's so damn boring, because all it's doing is really at the end of this long sort of soliloquy, a privatized ego stroking. He's at the end talking about work and brotherhood. He's saying you're a slave and that you need to work and take your mind off of, if you really want to know what Morals and Dogma is about, with all, like Albert Pike, he was a genius. Yeah. He probably had over a 200 IQ, right? Um, and people like Manly P. Hall, look at his pictures. You're going to tell me in his older videos, because he did this his entire life, where he was instructing people and so forth, but really what he was instructing them in, he was recruiting them into the Masonry, which I'm not sure if he really. I think he knew it. Yeah, he knew it. He knew what he was doing, right? That he was recruiting them into a brotherhood and a sisterhood, the Eastern Stars, right? And that, of course, he understood the symbol that was available to them, that was the inverted pentagram. Do you embrace femalehood or womanhood as it's transposed into a carnal aspect of this earth within this time signature? And once you do that, are you going to responsibly balance this out? And what we find is whatever is interacting with us at a higher tier in processing in the system that we can't see, but we are below it, is this transfiguration of a higher tier mode or modus, right? A world, or modi or mode, right? Mouth world, right? Look it up. That you could kind of get into this gravity well, if you will, as well, where now that you're deviating off a clear path, and you're also not going through this curvilinear arc or arch, right? Therefore, you're not traveling to a predestined position and being carried by the succession of mimetics. Now that you're going down through this well, now that you're using your mouth, and there's something coming out from that mouth and projecting out of that mouth, instead of this mouth just being silent and being a form, now there is a barking out into the universe in specific dialectical language model patterns that are displaying the communication. Is it helpful or is it hurtful? It's recruiting toward one process or the other. It's either pointing toward a very, what seems like such a thin line that I've gotten into in prior videos, where you have 6 points, and then you have a deviation of 6 points, the flower, the seed, the tree of life, which is a very evil thing, right? Because what they're doing is they're trying to build a bridge to the higher tier reality, right? And take directions directly from that field information, that there may even be visitors from that other tier, right? And so we're looking at dimensional zones that get into very abstract areas, that one can only come to these when they are no longer simply initiates, but they have used and utilized the symbols and seen the power to the symbols. And that if you just simply get in line with the inverted pentagram, right, and you don't go too far, but you are in the recruitment aspect of, I'm not going to tell them good or evil. I'm leading them to these two doors, and whether or not they want to travel to the right side of the column, the left side of the column, or right on through the center, or maybe they want to try to blow the column up, or take on the brotherhood, whatever stance they're taking. This is a process that others have gone into prior to. The outcome has been definite. What information do you have that differentiates you from your fellows, from the people that you didn't see centuries before, that went into this same process? Because this is the application of technology in its lower and higher state, that you begin to then see things, again, like Nathaniel Gillis talks about in which lower literature, grimoire, right, in certain writings that seem so abstract that a person like this Amon Hillman, why are people gravitating toward him? Because they don't think that he's anything more. They see that he's standing there as a lower aspect of the lower nature. They see how it's tearing them apart. I mean, look at the people who lead the satanic church, and look at physically how they're being broken apart, and even more so how they want to be broken apart, because they are working as adversaries, saying "f you" to the existence of this universe. But in doing so, their bodies, their will, their souls, their being, that they exist in a certain point in time, has ambition. And the problem is that you can't just remove ambition. Is your ambition to open up the field broadly, widely, to say, look, this is what happens to people when they go too far to the left? And even if you are not an aspect of the demiurge that Cliff High gets into, right? And again, you have to go toward Jason Riza Giorgiani. You have to look at where he's going with this, where he's not making this proclamation necessarily that he is a Satanist, but he does, right? He's leaving it as an abstract hung form, as to say that anybody who puts you in line with such a ridiculous hypothesis, a hypotenuse, right, an angle, a Christianity, to say that this follows into the dictatorial paths of a specific and definite state of geometrical unity, right, of these 3 points. And it is, in fact, trying to filter you through to take your energy from you, because most of this is a funnel of oppositional defiance. In other words, they're tricking you into the funnel field itself, right? And he recognizes this. So now he's just sitting antithetical with all his degrees and all his, big 50-cent words. He's speaking in a sense by proxy, but he's also making a statement of, if I have to stand on a particular hill, like Hillman, right? I'm going to say that I would put myself up as, specifically Prometheus, but to say that if you're calling this central figure Prometheus, and this is actually Satan or Satana, right? That I see the feminine aspect from a rationalistic view. It's the women through samsara that give birth. It's the women who sacrifice the most. It's the women who are supposedly even though you have a lot of women who are that are practitioners, they're quite aware of it. You don't stay in a station unless you're there for a particular purpose. And so there's a stagnation that takes place where it's kind of like, look, when I come back, it's almost like the mafia. I was watching Casino the other night with my son, right? We broke it up into a couple different nights. And it's almost like Sharon Stone. It's like, okay, look, you're going to have to be there for me, says Robert De Niro, paraphrasing. When the time comes, I'm going to give you these keys. I'm going to give you access to these funds, to this money. But you are agreeing to me that you are in worship of this particular geometrical construct, the inverted pentagram, and that we are getting everything, the sustenance and life, from the worship of this inverted pentagram. And even though it seems like we're having all these times, ups and downs, and we're privileged and we have all this money, and some unseen force seems to be protecting us until the car gets blown up, right? Because then it's debtor day. Is that if you don't break this practicum and you stay in succession, you can have this your whole lifelong. In fact, you can be like Albert Pike, where you have an actual statue erected, and only when those people tear that statue down on the presupposition that they are of a higher moral order, then they're going to have to prove it, and then they're going to have to stand behind that moral order and say they have to describe it in detail. That if you are a mathematician, these are the mathematics of which I stand on, and this is the hill that I die on. This is the progression that I live by, back into regression, but I live by this mantra where I have now identified and seen the very traits that came from an unseen force that I am, right? The calling out that I am, but in the brotherhood of Masonry, I am a part of, right? I'm a brother of. In the sisterhood of the Amorai, or the Morai, of Clotho spinning her web in time, right? It could be a web or it could be clothing, right? It depends on how you see it. Just like a sphere is an electromagnetic spherical body, almost like Vitruvian Man, wrapping around you. Is it protecting you from the outside, or is it a prison, right? So that is something we literally have to take seriously, because we're coming into a time where that's the next thing that's going to be cast upon you, that's already happening, where now that you have a time signature, now that you lived in the caste system, now that you're one of the members in this society, are you then going to proselytize the use of the spherical body, electromagnetic spherical body of energy, as to say this is going to protect you, but you ultimately have to decide. And we're at first going to give you this device to wear in your pocket, but then we're going to show real soon what comes next is all the radiation and the EMF disturbance that this causes to your genitals, that it causes to your birth production and so forth, your health, your endocrine system, brain activity, that we want to take this away and give you a very low level EMF that actually maybe even assists you and put the chip inside of you. And from the resistance of this sort of caste Christian perspective, right, that the Christians actually have to say, look, we came to these aphorisms that are only suggested in the Bible, but we were also using a sort of mancy, right, that brought us to this place that we believe in Jesus, we believe in this, but we know that in practicum, in practicality, this may not be the way that it actually played out in physical form. But our story, right, and this is where the Masons look at, like Albert Pike in specific, at Adonai and go, this is a lesser God. That if you are not going to admit that there is an etheric and arcane process, a magic, if you will, to how you arrive at certain truths that you have inferred and written in biblical, throughout antiquity, biblical prophecy, the workings of the Bible, leaving certain, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi, using a certain Council of Nicaea selection process to now create this arbitrary arbiter's dictatorial tone of authorship. But in fact, you had to be below a certain IQ level. You had to be at a certain point where you needed to be seen by the brotherhood around you, and that you are, in fact, in a cult, right? That is just as diabolical, that is just as self-serving, if not less transparent and more occulted than this Satanism is over here, right? So you could argue for the point, but this is what everyone's missing, is there is a higher tier to this entire order, right? That stupefies and stumps those who are stuck in the pentagram and the six-pointed star, as well as those who are acquisitioning, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, if you want to get into that, but it's really the Pharisees, the Khazarians, and this Jewish select group that takes all the energies of all those Jews that don't really practice what they're doing, but they identify with Judaism, right? And their energy, just like these unknowing Christians that haven't done their research, but you have these people that Nathaniel Gillis was talking about. I can't even remember his last name, Bo, whatever. And this guy, you look at him and he looks like the expression of evil because you're coming to the gate again. Just like Joel Osteen or Ornstein or Osteen. You're looking at these people who are recruiting, right? They're recruiting. They're bringing you to the gate, and whatever is in your heart, right? Whatever is in your intention, whatever energy is really within you, right? That is the expression when you come up to that altar, just like these people are taking it so nonchalantly. And this guy's just collecting money, right? And this televangelist, and you're coming to this, you're going through the procession, through the process, but people that are in line, just like the Emerald Tablets, how Thoth describes it, right? He sees these orbs that are transitioning into the next life, right? And the person behind you, your mother that you're walking up there with, the person 10 paces behind you, right? Everybody has a slightly different intentionality that it approximates itself into a geometrical form that is an algorithm that sends out a specific message. And when you are going up to that altar, you are saying that I digress, or I regress, or I slightly modify my stance so that I can go into this collective form of the pentagram, right? The pentacle, the upturned pentagram, the inverted downturning pentagram, right? Which is a more earthen, Wiccan type of concept that uses kind of both of these mercurial nebulous aspects to transition between these two states, but you are, in fact, either on the right or the left. And even more so, you get into this six-pointed Star of David that really Christians are positing that they so it's Jewish light. They are still going back to the Judaism. They're still going back to the well. They're going back to this form, right? But they don't realize that the people at the top of this Pharisee mafia, of this Khazarian mafia, are in fact using the tree of life and cleaving off and possibly, I hate to say it, and this is where, things break off, but this is why Robert Bigelow, I think, remains very silent and will even allow people like Joe Rogan to railroad over him in interviews and so forth that he's not going to talk about. There's certain things, experiences that bring you to knowing that you are just not going to talk about. And he is a very respectful gentleman, but he's also entered in, just like all of us. At this point, what I'm telling you is you can't just hide from it, and by telling your kids to stay away from it, and that's just weird stuff, that at the height of science, at the height of technology, at the height of physics, at the height of mathematics, at the height of philosophy, they're all talking about the same thing right now, right here on this planet, which is that you have to, and they are doing this, they're going to these altars and they're displaying what their reverence and their belief and their faith systems are. And in fact, there's a derivation, a delineation, a separation between the processing, a filtration of these particular energies, as to say that I support and I stand in line with this particular modus, this energy.